My name is Milorad, and today I'm going to be talking about middle-aged Naba in Dominion 6. We're going to be talking about the changes and new considerations for the new features in Dominion 6 as it relates to Naba. Like in my last video with Shinuyama, this is not national overview. This is not a guide on how to play them. We're going to be talking about some of the changes and focusing on new spells and blesses and other things like that. Um, it's going to be a longer video. I'm going to be going into depth, especially for the spells, because a lot has changed for this nation with the addition of Glamour. Okay, so let's start first with scales and economy and sites. Okay, so first of all, every nation was of course impacted by the fact that you can only go to 2 production and 2 order. On most scales you can only go up to 2. um, this does impact Naba because you have good troops, right? So you have this one and this one and this one Adites. In Dominions 5 you could go high. You could do like 3 production, 3 order, and just pump out a million of these. Um, you could do that to a lesser extent because they did reduce the resource costs for all of these. They're all, excuse me, uh, 2 to 4 resources cheaper. So it is a little bit easier to make them. And the camel recruitment points went down. So even though you cannot do as good scales, your troop costs have gone down somewhat in terms of resources and recruitment points. Um, you only have 1 pretender that can go to production 3, which is this one. So keep that in mind. You have a lot more options though for order if you want to go that high. Okay, so then most nations can only do magic 2, but you can do magic 3 because of course a lot of your Jin units like have the magic power, so it's thematic of course that this nation can go up to magic 3. If you do magic 3 and you get the throne, you could even have a magic 4, and that would give all your units that have the magic power, they would get +4/+4 to their stats, which would be very powerful uh, on them if you're fighting in your own dominion. Okay, with heat, you can go up to heat 3, but this is not as brainless as it was in Dominions 5, where you would just automatically go heat 3, because you have to consider now that heat can go over 3, so that means in the summer your provinces will be heat 4, and you have no ability like Abyssia to reduce population death from too much heat. Um, this will not be like a super big problem because it's only part of the year, but it is something you should consider. Um, okay, as far as your sites go, there's been changes. So you lost the access to Astral. This used to give you an Astral in Dominions 5, but now the Vault gives you 1 Glamour instead. Um, this is kind of symbolizes the shift for Naba towards a glamour nation, um, and Astral is much less important. The dam, um, now only increases growth by 2. So you start, if you play on like a standard maps, you start in a waste, and that reduces population even with growth 2. So you will be, if you have a neutral growth on your scales in your capital, you will have growth 2, but because of the waste you will actually have a population loss even with growth 2, because of the waste having the negative growth, and it's even worse in summer if you go heat 3. So it's not like not negative 2, sorry, it's a negative 0.2%. So it's not very noticeable. Um, it's not very noticeable in a unless you play a very long game. Then you, but even then, you're not like a nation that really heavily depends on your capital sacred that you're gonna worry about you losing your population. The other thing that's important is this gives 50 more gold than it did in Dominions 5. This is important and noticeable at the beginning of the game because the gold costs for troops have not increased, only the mages, right? So this means that you can have more gold, excuse me, more gold at the beginning of the game to make more troops. Okay, so let's now talk about units first before we go on to the commanders. So the first change I want to talk about is that all the Adites, these three, and the Jangard, they all went from size 3 to size 4. So in Dominions 5, you can only put two in a square and that will be it. But now they have a room for two other spaces, and that is important on this nation because you have um, easy access to Nest of Salamander at Conjuration 4, which will make 10 Salamander Asp, which are size 1. So two of them can fit in with two of these, and Salamander Asp has heat power. So if you go heat 3, uh, Salamander Asp will have 15 attack. So, and it does very high poison damage, not as high as the the other Asp with the nature death, but it is high enough to do poison damage and debuff the enemy. So that's a useful thing. You can also make Clockwork Horror. They recently changed to reduce the fatigue for Clockwork units from down to a lower amount to make it more manageable. But you need to consider that if you're gonna use Clockwork Horrors, you need to position them very far in the front because they will fatigue out sooner before they impact the enemy because of the battle sizes being bigger. But the Clockwork Horror, it has two attacks, is size 2. It will fit in nicely with your Adites and give them additional killing power because it has two attacks. Okay. So like I said, all the Adite troops and Jangard are slightly cheaper in resources. It makes it a little bit easier to make them. Most noticeable is this guy because he had 37 previously. It was hard to make a lot of them. With the general economy changes that, larger population, more resources, more recruitment points for larger armies, you will find it easier to make these if you want to make a row. Sometimes in Dominions 5, people will make like a row of these as a blocking unit because they have good protection and they're okay in melee. Okay. Um, a lot of your units depend on archery. So like this one, and this one. And in Dominion 6, archery is now half scaling, which is good because it increases the damage of all your bow units. So like this one now has 11 instead of 9, 13 instead of 11, and this is 18, which is very high. If you put the Gift of Giant Strength on them, they go up to 20, which is now as much damage as the Ashdod archer, but because that one is size 6, he can only have one in a square. So this is more a density and it's a lot cheaper because the other one is 40, and this would do the same amount of damage. However, conversely, you have to think with the changes in archery that your units that have very low protection, like this one and the camel, are even more vulnerable to arrows than they were in Dominions 5. Okay, so with the Camel Rider, you know, this is now hybrid unit because it has the Camel. They both have very low protection. Um, the way you can think of this unit now, though, is think of this as having a 50% increase in health points because the Camel has 20 HP. Uh, the way the missile combat works is if there's a mount, 50% of the time it will hit the mount. So, if this guy gets hit, the rider, um, he will usually die to like one arrow, maybe two, if he gets lucky and gets hit in the leg or the arm. But with the camel, um, some of the arrows will hit this instead. And this has enough HP to take a couple, maybe arrows. So think of this as having effectively like half a 50% more HP. Um, the other changes to this unit is he now has a mobile archer. I released a video on archery and I had a demonstration specifically about how this works using this unit. So I will link it in the description. But essentially, this allows them to shoot their arrows um, while they are moving. So you can use fire and keep distance to bait enemy squad. Um, and they will not stop to fire, so it's harder for the enemy to catch up to them. And they have a very high combat speed to begin with. Um, However, this has been less exciting than I had hoped it would be in Dominion 6. Um, I'm glad it exists, but your units will get stuck on the edge of the map if you don't have anything else to catch the unit that's pursuing them. And then these will die very quickly in melee. The other consideration with this unit is they changed, they got rid of raid, so now it's move and pillage, but you have to have 20 map move or more. So these guys can do it still if they're led by Sheik, because he has very high map move. However, these cannot because they have less than 20 map move for the army. So just keep that in mind. However, there is more use case for these now because, um, bows are somewhat better than they were in Dominions 5, and this is extremely cheap. Um, and you have, lower level flaming arrows that's not battlefield wide that you can put on smaller groups of these. So this is a very cheap way to get short bow. Okay, so we're done with the units. Um, Now I want to talk about the commanders. Um, specifically the mages, because all of them, a majority of them have been changed. Okay, so like the Carib and this one have not really had any significant changes, so we can kind of ignore them for right now. But what I want to focus on is the others because they've all had changes. Um, so first of all, the John Amir is much better than it was in Dominions 5. Because in Dominions 5, the John Amir was one fire, one air, with the randoms of fire, air, and earth. So, if you got like a fire 2, he's not super useful for thugging. He will just be like another fire 2 to shoot fireballs. But, now you have a glamour, and he can get the glamour 2, which allows him to do much more thugging options, which we will talk about when we get into magic. But this is much better than it was in Dominions 5, in my opinion. The Sahir is the same effective pass, except he also got one glamour. The randoms are the same. So this is important because it's the only way to introduce glamour into your communions unless you get a very lucky random on your Malika, or you build the communion thing. They changed the name of it in Dominion 6. The Sky Metal is what it's called now, but the one that lets you do communions. So this is important because it will allow you to introduce communions to your nation. To your glamour to your communions. Um, okay, before we talk about Malika, because it's gonna be a longer discussion, Hermet Sahir in this loses access to Astral entirely. Like they no longer have a random for Astral, and they cannot get Earth 2 because in Dominions 5 they could random to have Earth 2. Now you have Glamour, and you can instead random to have um, Glamour 2, which in some ways is better, in other ways is worse. Um, but this opens up a lot of options for this to be a battle mage to use Glamour. And I think with the changes in the scale of the battles, it's more important than ever to have foreign recruit mages. So you definitely want to focus on making as many of these as you can. Okay. Um, Malika, this is a big change, and not all of it is positive. So the old one was 3 fire, 3 air, 1 earth with randoms in fire, air, earth, astral, and nature. So now um, it's 3 fire, 2 air, 2 glamour with all the same randoms except also glamour. So this, in some ways, this dilutes the pass because now you only have a 1 in 6 or like 16% chance of getting any of these versus 1 in 20. Um, that can be a problem when you're trying to get very specific ones like 4 fire and 3 glamour in order to make a booster in those respective schools, right? Okay, so you can no longer get 4 air, which is the biggest issue. So if you want to make an air booster, you need to plan to have it on your pretender. Whereas in Dominions 5, the 1 in 5 Malika will be 4 air and could make the booster. You also can no longer get 2 earth. However, that is less important because you have a 2 earth ran already on your or you have 2 earth random on the Sahir. 1 in 3 will be that. So that's less important. But it does close some doors for doing certain buffs unless you have a gem if you get the earth random. However, the earth random is very important because uh, earth and glamour has a booster in construction 7 called Mirage Crystal, and it requires 3 glamour, 2 earth. So in order to do that, you need the Malika to have a earth random, because then she can wear the glamour hat at construction 5 and earth boots from construction 5, and then she will have the paths necessary to make the Mirage Crystal, which also, if you see, has where is it? Oops. It has a discount as well for Naba, 20%. So that's gonna be important that you have at least one Malika that randoms Earth, so she can make that. Okay, going back to this, the Glamour 3 is also very important because unless you put Glamour on your Pretender or you get the Lucky Hero, which we will talk about as well, this is your only way to get 3 Glamour, which is what's necessary in order to make the Glamour booster at Construction 5 to wear the hat. Okay, and we'll go into magic that she can use with these different paths when we talk about that section. Okay, now briefly, heroes. This has the same paths as the Yanamir. It's just a smaller in size. This was the same situation in Dominions 5. Um, when you get these are like a multi-hero, so you can get more than one. Just think of it as a free Janamir, which is like 420 gold savings. He can do everything basically the same way that the other one does, except he cannot bless himself. Um, okay, this is the other one. They changed this. So in um, the Queen of Naba, the old one was 4 fire, 3 air, and 3 earth. So what this means is you lose access to the earth entirely in exchange for 3 glamour. This kind of demonstrates the shift of the nation towards glamour in Dominion 6. So now you cannot get 3 earth to make a hammer. You have to wait until you get um, construction 5 to make a boots and put them on a sahir with a random earth in order to make a hammer if that's important to you. Um, However, this is now like a guaranteed way to get 3 glamour if you did not put it on your pretender, and if you're getting very unlucky rolls with your malika, because only 1 in 6 of them will have a glamour 3. So this is important if you have luck scales. Okay, so then the summons. Um, some of these are the same. I'm only going to go over the ones that have really changed significantly. So the Jinn um, now has a glamour. These same paths, but now has 1 glamour. Um, Marid, so he loses 1 earth, but he gets 2 glamour. This is a way to get water glamour crosspath if you don't already have it. But keep in mind, of course, this is Conjuration 8, so it's like very late game. But there are some things that are important with the water glamour crosspath. Hori is, I think, great change. So she loses 1 air, but she gets 2 glamour. Um, and now in Dominion 6, they have additional items that give what they call beauty, pendant of beauty, glamour, which will basically give her a bonus to seduction rolls when they're checking against, morale. Um, Same with this Salat, right? So this one is also seducer. So she loses a earth in exchange for glamour. Um, both of these units um, can also carry a bag of winds, which is like a new. The community calls it a Pokemon item, but what this is a new item. That's, yes, it gives temporary air, which is important. You're going to be using a lot of these, but it also gives you a retinue of a size 4 air elemental, which is useful in assassination if they fail a seduction. So this is like a very good Pokemon item, much better than the Earth Nature one that gives you the Vineman. Okay, while I'm looking at this bracelet, and then it gives you the Karin. I don't know how you pronounce it, but this was changed. This is wrong. It does not say air and astral. This tip is incorrect. Um, it is actually glamour and astral, which is better than air and astral because 1 glamour has much more useful buffs. It can cast, luck. It can cast blur. These are much better if you want to put this on one of your guys who's thugging, and then the Quarin will come out and like buff them with body ethereal, perhaps lock, blur, and it will allow your thug to do other things instead. Well, actually, this already has luck, but still, it can still cast other spells um, on units around it, not just the thug. Okay. Uh, Going back to this, um, yeah, nothing else has really changed that I could tell, except I did want to point out with the Hin, this you have to have a wasteland to cast it. But now if you play on the standard maps, you're guaranteed to have a wasteland in your capital, so you can always make these. I think same with this one as well, but like nobody really makes this because it has a weird cross path of water air. Okay, so now I want to talk about spells. Uh, First, we're going to talk about spells, and then we're going to go into the blesses at the end, the new ones that might be relevant to this nation. With the spells, I'm going to go school by school, so this is going to be a long section, but I'm going to, in the description, put the timestamp for each school so you can, skip ahead if you don't want to watch the whole thing. Um, okay, so again, like I did with my Shinoyama video, I'm not going to be talking about every possible thing. I'm also not going to be talking about existing spells unless they have changed, or have a new relevance to Naba, because I don't want to repeat what we already know is good. I want to focus on new spells, and how they maybe relate to this nation. Okay. Okay. So first, in Conjuration, I wanted to highlight, um, Nest of Salamander. I mentioned this earlier, but this is very easy to cast. Um, Sahir, and then of course the Hermit Sahir, and then the Yan Emir. If they get a random, with the Fire in the Jar, they can all cast this. It makes Salamander Asp size 1. Very good way, especially early game, to get poison damage in and add density to your squares. Um, Storm Drake is new. So this is affected, by all the other spells that increase, all the other items, from the Dragon Mastery that increase the number of them. This is now one of them as well. Uh, so this unit is not, in my opinion, quite as good as the Fire Drake or the other Drakes, because it's on. Yes, it's undisciplined like the others, but this one flies. So it will like immediately turn one, jump to the back, or jump to the enemy lines and like get killed. Um, so you have to, like, if you want to use this, you have to try to turn one, have uh, mages nearby to do point buff, body ethereal, or mist form, to give this a little bit of survivability. Otherwise, it's gonna die immediately. It's pretty good. It does a chain lightning. It's not as strong as the spell one, but it's not bad, especially if your enemy has a lot to chaff with low armor, um, or low HP. I mean, and no uh, shock immunity. Um, Griffins, this is an old spell, but I want to highlight it for several reasons. First, you get twice as many now than you did in Dominions 5. You get 10, and I don't have a mod inspector open, but you can go check and verify that they now added a attack to the Griffin. Now he has 3. Um, so they're very powerful, even though they are undisciplined. Early game, you're going to have a size 8, 40 HP, 44 HP Griffin with 3 attacks, and they're flying. That can really mess up an opponent, and it comes early. And they're also good for sieges. um, so, air elementals have been debuffed in Dominion 6 because now they're size 7, and that means there's lots of things they can no longer trample. Also, if they take damage, they go down very quickly in size, because now you cannot give them Iron Skin, or like other stuff like that because of a spirit form. So I found myself in my games that I was playing, my test games, I was using air elementals much less. Of course, they're still useful, but I did not find them to use them as much as I did in Dominions 5. Um, Backing up for a second, the Fey folk, 1 in 6 of Malika will be nature. If you want to use glamour, you have a lot of need for glamour, but this is a way to get units with magic weapons, because you don't have innate magic weapons on any of your troops, unless you put, of course, the bless on your young guard. Um, Okay, and then Draconian is important because you get more, and they also have an additional attack that does poison than compared to what they were in Dominions 5. They also have a new sprite that looks so much better. Again, I'm not going to go every possible unit or every possible spell. I'm just kind of highlighting the ones I wrote notes for. Blue Cap. Well, to back up for a second, Cave Kobold first. This will give you siege power. You know, a lot of your guys who random Earth and also the Sahir can make these. And what's important is that you have, you know, stealthy mages like this one. Um, he can have 10 cave kobolds attached to him. That will be 100 siege strength, and they can hide. Um, they can hide and then add a siege strength to your army without them having to fight. The way that other things that add siege strength, like cave grubs, but you know, cave grubs are very vulnerable and you need a cave. Whereas um, cave kobolds, they can be cast anywhere and they're stealthy. Okay, so you already have these paths, but if you want to make a blue cap, this is a way to have a Earth 2 Glamour 1 that's stealthy in the event you want to do something that stealthy on because the Sahir is not stealthy. Um, like for example, if you wanted to do like a stealth Curse of Stones, you know, not saying you should, but you know, it's better in my opinion in Dominion 6 because the mounts have a low MR. So you could do a Curse of Stones stealthily when your opponent is not prepared for it if you have a blue cap because he's too Earth. Okay, and then Hori now is easier to cast because in Dominions 5 it was 2 air, 1 nature, and you had to rely on getting a 1 in 5 nature random on Malika. However, now all the Malika, no matter what their random is, have this as well as Sahir. So this is very easy to cast now. And then jumping all the way down, again, I'm not going to talk about every possible one, but I did want to highlight this, is Fairy Court. So if you get to nature random, and she wears Malika, and she wears a hat and the crystal mirage or mirage crystal, she will be these paths, 4 glamour and 1 nature. So what this does is it will create Fairy Queen in heat, which will give you 3 nature. So that's the highest nature it will give you. If for some reason you have a cold forest instead, like if for example enemy dominion, you can cast it and get the Unseelie Queen instead, and she gives you 3 water. And also can random death, which will break you into new paths. But of course, this is, you know, very late game. Oh yeah, just to back up with the gnome, you know, you can have these paths on a Malika if you get the Earth random, um, and then she wears the boots and the glamour hat. She can cast this, and this will give you a gnome that has 2 glamour, 2 earth, and 2 nature. So this is another way to break into nature higher on this nation because you're going to have these paths. Okay, alteration. Again, I'm not going to talk about every spell. I'm just some of them that I've highlighted that I think are useful. So you have a blurred body and blur. These are very early, and there are ways to do. You know, this is on yourself, and then this is area of effect 1. This is very early things you can do to, you know, lower your enemy morale, not morale, enemy attack rolls against your troops if they don't have a spirit sight or true sight. Body ethereal was moved up to alteration 3. You know, all of your holy 2, astral 1 I forgot the name of them, but all of those mages have guaranteed Astral 1, so they can point buff body ethereal, and it comes sooner than it was in Dominions 6, or sorry, in Dominions 5. The other important spell for thugging is displacement. So this will give you, this is like the bless displacement, so it reduces attack by 5. The first one is reduced by 10, which is as much as unseen. So this is very powerful on a thug, and a lot of your thugs are going to have 2 glamour. So like the Yanamir, Malika, if you choose to use them that way, they're going to, especially the Yanamir that rolls 2 glamour, you want to definitely use displaced body. Group blur is like a higher version of the existing blur that we talked about. I don't think blur is as good as some of the other options you have that we'll discuss in other schools if you have 2 glamour. But early on, this is something you can do. The other thing I want to talk about is, of course, Twilight. So in my Shinuyama video, I talked about how like some nations you want to have leave Twilight up, and others you want to turn it into Nightfall at Dominions at level 5, right? In this case, you don't have any troops with the Dark Vision except for some of your summons, right? But you're never going to have a lot of them. This is a nation where you definitely would rather leave a Twilight up. So, Malika can cast this if she randoms, but more important, you're usually not going to want to have a, because only 1 in 6 of them is glamour 3. You're not going to want to risk them too much, in my opinion. So this is more likely you're going to cast this either in a communion or with extra gems or a booster, right? So you want to definitely have one of your mages do this, because then it will improve glamour for all of your mages. All of your glamour mages, and a lot of your mages have glamour. Oh yeah, mist form. So now you could do a area of effect 1 mist form, point buff. This is important because now you can put it on. So for example, later I'm going to talk about gym block and how they have some new utilities. So like for example, gym block with a gem, he can cast this point buff on himself and anything that's in his square. For example, if you had a thug that was coming in to assist a gym block, um, you know the purpose of this spell is that now you can have somebody else buff a thug who doesn't have 2 air or who's busy casting something else. So someone else can stand in a square with the, let's say, Yanamir, and point buff him if he has a 2 glamour instead and he's putting on other spells on himself. You can also put this on like some elite troops, like a Yan guard. However, you don't have like a very Keely troops that really benefit from having mist form. So this would be, and battles are so much bigger than they were in Dominions 5. So you're only going to end up having a couple of these, a couple of squares that have mist form. I don't really think it's worth it to use on troops that much. This is better to use on mages or communion slaves or thugs if you want to point buff them that way. Also, like on a Storm Drake we were talking about earlier, if you can have a mage that casts this on a Storm Drake turn 1 to improve their survivability. Okay, invisibility is another one I highlighted. So this will give your mage unseen, which is the same thing that like the Ubar troops have and some of the other Jinn. This is like -10 to enemy roll unless they have true spirit sight. So none of your recruitable mages have this innately, so you have to cast it. So what this means is that you have the glamour spool at construction 5, or you can carry gems, but your mages that have 2 glamour, like the Yanamir, they can cast this on themselves, or of course they can wear a booster, but you probably don't want to waste a booster on them. You rather have the temporary gem spool, so you can cast invisibility on themselves, and this greatly improves their ability to thug, because everything will have a -10 roll unless they have a spirit sight. So this is extremely easy way to raid PD, or like a smaller force that doesn't have a mage that's capable of giving the troops spirit sight, because you can do gift of spirit sight, but you have to be prepared for it. um, Arrow Fend is now later, and now it's very hard for your nation to cast, because in Dominions 5 you had ability for all of your Malakas could cast this, but now it's Air 4, and it comes later, and now at most you're gonna get Air 3 on 1 in 6 Malika. So it's much harder to cast this. Another way you could do it is in a communion with Sahir. If they're in a communion, they could also do it without the need for a booster. And then of course they could be in a communion and use extra gems to cast this. But you also have a smaller version, which is Arrow Ward. And you have that item that we talked about earlier, Bag of Winds. So you have a free air gem that makes it easier to cast this if you have it on your Sahir to cover like a smaller area of it. But of course, the Sahir will need 2 gems in order to cast this, not just 1. So, we don't know yet how impactful this will be in competitive play, but this will be very interesting. Like I did lots of single player testing, but obviously this does not really work the same way in a single player game because you're playing against a computer, right? So this is like makes a fake castle, and it doesn't appear to the enemy until they besiege it, right? But this is a way that you could fool your opponents to target a specific province that they actually don't need to go to because there's no fort there. But I want to highlight that your nation can cast this. However, we don't know yet how important this will be to competitive play. I'm not going to say that I know for sure how much people will use this. Perhaps the gem cost will not be worth it. Another spell I wanted to highlight is Eternal Twilight. So some of the glamour blesses, the new ones, are very good that synergize with this nation. So you're gonna want to go high glamour in order to get it. So for example, this one, I did 7 glamour in order to get this bless. So what that means is that I'm only 1 away from 8 glamour in order to cast this. So you can get the Mirage Crystal and put it on your pretender to cast this, or if you have a human size or Titan, they can wear the hat at construction 5 to cast this. And what this does is you're gonna have every battle gonna have the Twilight effect, which will greatly improve all of your glamour mages. And then you also have all these other effects that you see in the tooltip, where basically the units can disappear in your enemy units can disappear in your dominion if they fail a morale and MR check, and it is kind of like screw you to the rest of the world because it lowers income somewhat. So you really want to be careful if you're going to put this up, because it's one of those globals. Some globals people do not care so much if it's up. They're not going to try to dispel it. But this is probably one. Again, I don't know because I haven't played competitive multiplayer to the point that I've had one of these spells cast in one of my games, but my intuition says from that this will not be a global that other people will tolerate, and they will try to dispel it or kill the guy who cast it, your pretender who cast it. +1 magic scale is also important, um, because yes, it will help your research, but usually by the time you get to this late alteration, you already have a lot of research. But it will also improve. We were talking earlier that if you took like a magic 3, this is another way to get higher magic, to get even more stats on your uh, Jinn and the Malika who have a magic power. Okay. Um, moving along, Evocation. Um, okay, so Sulfur Haze, like was a very important spell for Nabat early game in Dominions 5. So they've changed this. Now, like the cloud lasts a very long time, but it appears to be worse. I don't know definitively. I don't know, like looking in the code, but from the games I've played and the testing I've done, it feels like it does not damage the opponent quite as quickly as it did um, in Dominions 5. Um, Also, what's notable is that in Dominions 5, if you have a hit resistance, your units will be immune to this. However, now that only protects them from the fatigue, it does not protect them from the poison. So I discovered that when I had my Young Guard, because they have a 5 fire resistance. I had them go in early game, like wading into the clouds to fight the enemy, and they were still getting poisoned. um, okay, so new spell, False Fire. If you're looking at this, you may think that this looks like a worse version of a Fireball, because Fireball does not have an MR negate attached to it, but um, from playing around with it, because you have these paths on a lot of your mages, I actually think in some cases this is better, because you have Fireball got changed to have area of effect now damage, but it's only 6. So it does a lot of damage on the square it hits, but then it does a 6 to the area around it. Um, the False Fire is higher, it's 8. Now, yes, you have a MR negates. However, this is good against a chaff, like lots of chaff, because most chaff doesn't have very high MR, maybe like 10 or less. So this is a better way to clear lots of chaff, in my opinion. Especially if you have a Twilight or a mage that's too glamour, because you have a scaling. So like a lot of your mages already have these paths. If they get too glamour, now it's just as powerful as a Fireball because it will be 16. However, you have to also consider that the Fireball, anybody who has Fire 2 can easily cast Phoenix Power to be Fire 3, and then this is now 18 and it lowers the fatigue. So I would say if you're clearing chaff, you want to use False Fire, in my opinion. If you're doing stuff that has good MR, you use Fireball. This is a very powerful spell, Cloud of Dreamless Slumber. They got rid of Sleep Cloud in nature, like they did in Dominions 5. This is now the closest equivalent. This is very powerful, and not a lot of nations have this cross path, but you do in great numbers. So the Hermit here can cast this pretty easily. So can the Yanamir, who's random glamour. Some of the regular Sahir in a communion can do it. Malika can also do it, although you usually want to use them for something else. But this is very powerful. You might want to consider putting Undreaming on a Young Guard so they don't fall asleep. But if you do that, you have to remember that you can't then put Glamour Research Booster on any of your Sacred Mages, because they will also have an Undreaming. Also, you're never going to have that many Young Guards, so it's probably not worth it, in my opinion. But this is very powerful, and it's a good reason to do Farcaster um, as one of your blesses, because remember the battlefield size is larger than it was in Dominions 5, and a lot of the good glamour spells have a low range, so this will boost it to 45, and it's much more effective then at hitting your enemy lines sooner. Fire Cloud got changed in Dominions 5 from Dominions 5. Now it requires air, which means a lot of fire nations like uh, Abysia, Marignon, they can no longer cast this with their basic mages. However, you still can. So that's just something I wanted to highlight. And they change, of course, how clouds work. So it will spread out more. Hidden Flame is new. So this is like if you compare it to Incinerate, right? Incinerate does less damage and only affects one person, whereas but there's no MR check. Um, this one is a AOE 1, but it has MR check, and it can only be used against magic beings. Now, there's very few recruitable magic beings in Middle Age. I think it's only the relay. Now, obviously, like this would be much better in early age when you have the like Kilasa ones, and then in late age you have like Agartha that has recruitable magic beings. However, this will still be useful sometimes um, against some summoned units that are magic beings. Against enemy mages and commanders that are summoned that are magic beings, like for example, like a golem, they have very high magic resistance. Like a golem has 18, so it's going to be hard to get through that. Um, you know, you're going to end up only doing 12 if they fail the MR check. And then, 12, it is armor negating, but you have to cast it multiple times in order to hit it. And the other important thing is that this does not have 100 precision like Incinerate. This has 0, so you could definitely miss quite a bit with this. So you have to use it with precision boosting spells or items if you're going to use this. But 1 in 3 of a Yan, no, 1 in 3 of a Sahir can cast this if he randoms Astral. Also Malika, but only 1 in 6 is going to be Astral. Okay, Illusory Army. So this is the old Phantasmal Army from Dominions 5, except now it's no longer in air. It is now in Glamour, and the old one was 4 air, so it was hard to cast. This one is only 3 Glamour, so much easier to cast, and you have a temporary gem spool, so you can easily cast this with 1 extra gem to boost and then 1 to cast this on any of your Glamour 2, or of course in a Communion, or some of the Malakas can do it. But this is a good way to create like a ton of chaff, and in my opinion it's better that this is under Evocation for this nation than it was in Alteration for in Dominions 5, because Naba is like a heavy Evocation nation, especially because of like this smokeless flame. So this is something you would get along the way. Project Self is something Malaka can do if they random Astral. But keep in mind that this does not, they would have to wear a hat in order to be Glamour 3. And as you can see here, items are not projected, but any path boosting items are still in effect. So this will create Malaka in that province that's ethereal, but it does not, cannot carry any gems. So you cannot do this to cast Twilight, for example. This is only to cast spells, but it is a way to do it without the mage worrying about killing herself. The other one I want to talk about is Welling Winds. You had no access to this in Dominions 5 because it's a death spell, but now it's a glamour spell. So it's even more reason for you to go down high evocation, because um, if you get to glamour 3 on a Malika, or she regular Malika with a hat, glamour hat, they can cast this with 3 gems. Um, and we all know how good this was from Dominions 5, but now you have access to it in because it's been changed to glamour. um, so this is a new spell that I tested in a debug sensei, and if you read the tooltip, uh, you need to have darkness in order to cast this. So my initial thought was that I could do solar eclipse because you have access to that on this nation, and then immediately cast this afterwards. However, it did not work, so perhaps I did something wrong or there's a bug in the game. But this, if you read this, it seems to suggest that you should be able to cast this after casting solar eclipse. Um, you can cast it after casting Twilight, but the MR check will be lower for the enemy to fail and get stunned. So perhaps it's not intended to work with solar eclipse, or perhaps it is a bug. Maybe somebody who knows can explain. But hopefully they fix it, because this will be really good on Naba, because you already have access to Fire Astral and can cast Solar Eclipse and then cast this afterwards if they fix it. Okay, so moving on to construction. Um, one thing I wanted to highlight, I'm not going to go over the items because I already talked a lot about some of them, but one thing I wanted to highlight is this Iron Griffin. This is new. Um, so what it does is it creates 50 HP um, inanimate unit with all the resistances, all the physical resistances, and it has a breath attack like a Drake. However, it has longer range and more damage because it's half of strength, and it has a higher strength than the Flame Drake. Um, and it only uses 5 fatigue. It doesn't have ammunition, so he can keep casting it. This is very powerful in a static defense. If you put it, for example, on a gym block, because the gym block, um, the gym block cannot. Whoops, the gym block cannot move, and neither can the Griffin, Iron Griffin, right? But this has a magic leadership, so you can put him in a province that you want to defend. Perhaps, let's say you have a lab that's building a Hermit Sahir, and you don't have an army defending it. But what you can do is cast a gym block and then cast any of your Sahir that randoms fire can cast the Iron Griffin. And you put, let's say, I did this in a test. I put 2 Iron Griffin with the gym block. And if you give a gym block a gem or a bag of wind, he can cast Mist Form on the Iron Griffin. And then it's very powerful, very hard to kill because of all the resistances, and then it has Mist Form. And has the fire spell. So unless your enemy has a fire resistance, they will find it very difficult to dislodge 2 Iron Griffins, supported by a gym block. So that's something you might want to do to guard a important, choke point or a lab. Now, obviously, that will not stop like a large army with mage support, but it's a good way to stop raiding by like small numbers of units, or like that are not supported with a mage. Okay, under enchantment, so there are 4 spells that give awe. Uh, let's see, where is it? Okay, so Shroud of Splendor, this does only to yourself. And all of these tooltips are wrong. It is actually awe 2. So I don't know if they updated the game in one of the patches and forgot to change this, but this is actually awe 2 if you cast it in game. So this does it to yourself, and all of your Yanamirs will have this if they're going to be thugging. This one is a area of effect 1. So Hermit Sahir or the Yanamir, that random glamour, can point buff this. And then you have this one, Aura of Splendor. So with the extra gem, they can cast this, or a booster, or if Twilight is up. And this is a larger AoE. And then uh, you have this one, which is, this costs a gem, unlike the other one, and it's 20. So the Awe 2 is not bad, especially if it is paired with Dread. So if you do a Dread on your Bless for a Yanamir, for example, the Dread works very well with Awe. They synergize together because, as the morale goes down, it makes it harder for them to get through the Awe. Um, Oops. And then this is a new spell that does direct damage. So I want to compare this to Lightning Bolt because they're both 2 air, um, and they're both available fairly early, right? So this is far more accurate than Lightning Bolt because it has 25 precision. So from the testing I did, you were pretty reliable to hit targets in on round 1, especially in like assassination, because the Silat can cast this because she has 2 air, for example. This was very reliable in hitting a target on round 1. On a battle, less so, but you can still do it, and this has a very long range. However, the big difference between this and Lightning Bolt is armor negating, and this has this is not armor negating. Now it is magic damage, but the other problem with this is it operates like any other arrow, where it can hit you in the arm or a leg, and then it reduces the maximum damage that the unit can take. So you are not necessarily guaranteed a one-hit kill with this, because you have to factor in armor, and you also have to factor in getting hit in the arm or the leg. But in assassination with the Salat, this is exceptional. um, okay, yeah, so Shroud of Bewilderment. These are new spells. Um, so what this does, I had to test it, and I still don't fully understand it, because if you put this on a unit, you don't get the icon to show that it's active. But if you then look at the combat rolls, if you press V, you will see it says repeatedly, attack failed because of bewilderment. And what it is it's a MR roll versus opponent's MR roll. So MR plus DRN. I don't know what the base path is in this case. But it appears to be very high on the attacking side because a lot of the enemies were failing this check. So this synergizes well with Awe and Mist Form. Like for example, I had Mist Form, this, and Shroud of Splendor on a Yanamir, and it was very hard for opponents to hit him because they were failing these checks repeatedly, and they were not, popping Mist Form. Penetration bonuses apply is interesting if you chose to do Arcane Finesse. However, I think Farcaster is better. Obviously, you can do both now that you could not do in Dominions 5, but I think of the two, if you had to pick, I would still do Farcaster. Again, there's so much, and I don't want this video to go on for like 2 hours. I just want to highlight a couple more things. So, Wind Guide can now be used during, it negates the storm. So you could have Malika cast Storm for your, and then another one cast Wind Guide. To that way your archers are not impacted by a storm, but the opponent is. Also, you have this new spells called Far Flight, but as I discussed in my archery video, yes, this will increase the range by 50%. So for example, the Adite archer will have 75 range, which is ridiculous, but he's not going to hit anything at that. So this will only be effective if you have um, very large battle with hundreds of units, which is, more likely now in Dominion 6 because every arrow that goes up has to go somewhere. So, if you wanted to cast turn one a bunch of these in the back, they could hit, opponent back row if they get lucky, if there's a large number of opponents, because they're going to have such insane range, like more than most spells, but it's not likely to hit anything. Okay, Thaumaturgy. Again, I'm not going to go over every spell, especially since it's getting difficult for me to speak for so long. Okay, so the ones I want to highlight that are important are luck. Luck got changed from astral to glamour. Group luck is especially important because a lot of your mages will have a glamour 2, and you can now put this over multiple squares. This is especially useful on the Adites because they have they're strong units, especially like the archers. If you have them in a line, you can have a blocking line that's all covered with luck, and it'll be very hard for the opponent to get through it. um, Vision of Death was another important spell. You want to think of this as a higher damage Mind Burn, because Mind Burn is 12 armor negating, MR negates, but this is 25, so much higher. However, it does not have as good range as the other one. Mind Burn can hit anywhere on the battlefield. This cannot. But this is very high damage. It's not as good as Soul Slay, of course, but you're not going to have access to Soul Slay unless you have a very large communion because you don't really have high astral. But you do have high glamour, especially in a communion. Gates of Horn and Ivory. Malaka with 3 glamour wearing both boosters can make this. But I also recommend that you just go high in glamour on your pretender so they can also do this. The other spell I wanted to highlight in Thaumaturgy is that these new spells, Battle Fury, Furious Warrior, and the Gift of the Furies, you can easily cast this with your mages because you have a lot of access to fire. This is especially good on the Adites, like this one, for example. If you have a Sahir and they do Phoenix Power, they can cover, quite like 4 to 5 squares. And this is especially good on the Adites, like this one, because with the Javelin, they have to pause to throw it. And that gives a mage more time to buff them. And because this guy has a spear, he's going to be better at repelling. So this will be 13. So that's pretty good on a very baseline troop that you're going to have a million of these. But it really boosts their attack by 2 and their morale. But the attack is especially important. And then if you put it like on a Yan guard, it will be 16, which is crazy high. Also, if you have a row of these as a blocking, you can have a mage behind them doing small AoE buffs for fire to give them up to 12, which is respectable. Not great because they still have low defense, but they will be able to hold their own against chaff. Okay. I also wanted to highlight that you are now a Charm Nation, which you could not do before in Dominions 5 because Charm got moved to Glamour. So you can cast Charm if you go high down Thaumaturgy, which you might want to do because you might want to be aiming for Gates of Horn and Ivory. Sandman's Blessing is extremely powerful, but it's hard to cast. This is huge area of effect sleep spell. But with 5, and it doesn't require gems, but in order to get 5, you're going to need to have boosters, a very large communion, and also have Twilight up in order to get 5 reliably. But if you do, this is an extremely powerful spell. I also want to highlight Mirror Mind, especially this one, Mind Blank, because your Malaka that randoms Astral, you're not going to have very many of them, and they're all very vulnerable to Magic Duel. But as you read here, this kind of helps protect them somewhat against Magic Duel. However, it will still give you Feeble Mind, so it's not great. But if you have access to healers or you have access to recuperation on your bless, you could consider it. Okay, again, there's probably other spells I didn't even talk about, but I don't want to go on forever, and I want to go on to blesses to talk about. Okay, so this is a pretender that I built because I think Dread synergizes extremely well on this nation. Because you have lots of units that are good at thugging, like a Yanamir and Malika, and you have lots of access to spells that increase your longevity. So, for example, you have luck, you have Shroud of Splendor, you have a Shroud of Bewilderment, Mist Form. You have lots of ways to keep your thug alive, but they're not going to be very killy. So the Dread is a way to cause the enemies to run away, while the thug, buffs themselves with lots of spells that increase their survivability. Dread also works well um, on a gym block if he's guarding a province, because he can cast it on himself and then mist form with the gem. And again, with all these resistances, it's hard to get rid of him. Your enemy will have to bring a large enough force to dislodge it. You can't just do it with the regular units because the Dread will cause them to run away. The other consideration is if you use a Mukarib, sometimes people use these in Dominions 5 in what they call a. I had to look it up. I wrote it down. It's called a linebacker communion. That's like American football. I don't really know, but what that term exactly means. But it's like I think it's from American football. But essentially, what you can do is, in a communion, you have these be the slaves, and you have lots of buffs put on them, and then stick them in front, and the enemy will have a hard time killing them if they have Mist Form, Iron Skin, Luck, Shroud of Splendor, Fire Shield, Astral Shield. You can put all of those spells on these, and then they sit in the front, and the enemy is trying to kill them and failing repeatedly. Now, the only way to do damage would be with Fire Shield. However, if you put Dread on your Bless, these can also cause the enemy to run away as they're trying to kill the Communion slaves. Now, what are some... And then, of course, this is a very good 7 Glamour because he can cast Gates of Horn and Ivory. You don't have to worry about getting a 1 in 6 random to make a boosters for the hat, for your Malika. This can also cast Eternal Twilight, like we talked about before, with only 1 booster. So this is, like, I think, very good reason to go high Glamour. Looking at the other blesses, there's lots of new ones, but I don't feel like most of them synergize with your nation. Like, for example, all the weapon blesses, like, you only have 1 sacred unit and only has 1 attack. I don't really see a reason to waste all these points on a weapon bless. I think the best 2, in my opinion, are either Dread, if you're going to go like a high incarnate bless, will be Dread for the reasons we talked about, or Awe, because this Awe will stack with the spells. So you could have conceivably Awe 5 on sacred units if you also then put Shroud of Splendor, Gift of Splendor on them in addition to the Bless. And then that's very high. As far as your other blesses, I'm sure other people smarter than me will come up with something, but of the new blesses, I think the 2 that are the most viable will be Dread or Awe, in my opinion. And of course, Heroism is also very good, for reasons we already talked about in other videos, but it will stack experience quite a bit, and it will basically, you can easily get, if you have multiple stacks of Heroism, you can easily get to +3/+3 or +4/+4 from experience on your thugs, and if you are able to keep them alive. Okay, so I went on for quite a long time, and I'm sure I missed some stuff, but I can't possibly think of everything in one video. This is not intended to be a definitive guide. As I said at the beginning, I really just kind of wanted to highlight the changes and some new synergies that I've identified. I'm sure other people will think of other things. So if you have any corrections or additions, please put them in the comments. And thank you very much for watching my video.